The sterile, chemical stench of hospital bleach is a lot like the smell of cordite after a firefight. They both signify the aftermath of a battle. They both mask the scent of death. Angela Wright sat in the dimly lit corner of room 314 at Seattle Children's Hospital. Her eyes fixed on the rhythmic, jagged green line of the heart monitor. Beep, beep, beep. It was the only sound keeping her tethered to sanity. In that oversized, mechanical bed lay her entire world, 7-year-old Connor. His skin, once the color of sun-kissed peaches from their days at the park, was now a translucent, ashen gray. Dark, bruised half-moons hung heavy beneath his closed eyes. Angela leaned forward, the cheap plastic of the visitor's chair groaning under her shifting weight. She reached out, her hand, calloused, scarred, and trained to dismantle a sniper rifle in under 40 seconds, gently wrapping around her son's fragile fingers. He felt so cold. A rare, aggressive autoimmune disease was slowly turning his own body into a battlefield. And his heart was losing the war. "I'm right here, buddy," Angela whispered, her voice thick, swallowed by the hum of the ventilator. "Mama's right here. You keep fighting, okay? You're right. We don't quit." Connor didn't stir. He hadn't in 3 days. The heavy wooden door clicked open, and Dr. Evans walked in, his clipboard pressed tight against his chest like a shield. He was a good man, but his eyes carried the heavy burden of a messenger who only brought bad news. "Angela," he said softly, keeping his distance, "can we talk outside?" Angela carefully placed Connor's hand back under the warm fleece blanket. She stood up, her posture instinctively straightening, shoulders back, chin tucked. It was the stance of a staff sergeant bracing for a briefing. Out in the fluorescent-lit hallway, Dr. Evans let out a slow breath. "His heart is failing, Angela, faster than we projected. The medication is no longer holding the line." "How long?" The question came out sharp, devoid of the tremor she felt in her chest. "Military precision. Assess the threat. Determine the timeline." "A week, maybe 2, Dr. Evans replied, his voice breaking slightly, "unless he gets the transplant. But his blood type, the specific antibodies, he's at the very bottom of the National Registry." "I'm so sorry, Angela. We are doing everything we can. But you need to prepare yourself." Prepare herself. The words echoed in her mind as she walked out of the hospital into the biting, relentless Seattle rain. Prepare yourself. You can prepare for an ambush in the mountains of Kandahar. You can prepare for a high-valued target extraction in the dense jungles of Colombia. But you cannot prepare for the silence of an empty child's bedroom. Angela pulled the collar of her worn leather jacket up against the chill, her boots hitting the wet pavement in a steady, rhythmic march. The city was alive around her, neon signs bleeding red and blue onto the slick asphalt. Cars hissing past, people rushing home to their warm living rooms and healthy children. She felt like a ghost haunting a world she no longer belonged to. As she turned onto 4th Avenue, heading toward her cramped, run-down apartment, an old, deeply buried instinct flared to life. The hair on the back of her neck stood up. A prickling sensation crawled down her spine. She was being watched. Angela didn't stop walking. She didn't turn her head. She simply shifted her gaze to the reflection in a dark bakery window as she passed. 50 yards back, a man in a dark trench coat, pretending to look at his phone. Across the street, a black SUV was rolling forward at a crawler's pace, matching her stride. Her heart rate, previously heavy with grief, suddenly spiked with cold, calculated adrenaline. The mourning mother vanished. The Tier 1 operative awoke. She took a sharp right into a narrow, unlit alleyway. It was a dead end, bricked up at the back, smelling of stale beer and wet garbage. She moved swiftly, melting into the deep shadows behind a rusted industrial dumpster. She slowed her breathing. In for 4 seconds. Hold for 4. Out for 4. The tactical breathing exercise grounded her. She slipped her right hand into the deep pocket of her jacket, her fingers wrapping around the cold, textured grip of a folding karambit knife she never left home without. Footsteps echoed at the mouth of the alley. Heavy, deliberate. The man in the trench coat stepped into the gloom, a suppressed pistol drawn and held at the low ready. He was professional, sweeping his muzzle left to right, checking the corners, but he was looking for a woman running away. He wasn't looking for a predator waiting in the dark. As he passed the dumpster, Angela exploded from the shadows. She didn't scream. She didn't hesitate. Her left hand shot out, grabbing his gun wrist and twisting it violently inward, forcing the muzzle away from her. Simultaneously, she drove her right knee into the side of his thigh, striking the femoral nerve. The man let out a stifled grunt as his leg buckled. Before he could hit the ground, Angela swept his other leg, taking him down hard onto the wet concrete. She drove her knee into his chest, pinning him, the curved blade of her karambit resting gently against his carotid artery. "Give me one good reason not to open your throat right now," Angela hissed, her eyes burning with a lethal intensity. "Because if you do, Connor dies on Tuesday." The voice didn't come from the man pinned under her. It came from the mouth of the alley. Angela froze. The blade pressed a millimeter deeper, drawing a bead of blood. But she didn't strike. She slowly turned her head. A figure stepped out from the black SUV, silhouetted against the streetlights. As he walked closer, the dim glow of a flickering security light revealed his face. He was in his late 50s, impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, his silver hair neatly combed. He held an umbrella in one hand and a thick manila folder in the other. "Director Vance," Angela breathed, the name tasting like ash in her mouth. "It's been a long time." "Staff Sergeant Wright," Marcus Vance said smoothly, his voice a calm, aristocratic baritone. "5 years since you went off the grid. You've been a very hard woman to find. But a sick child, well, that leaves a paper trail. Even for someone as skilled as you." Angela stood up, kicking the suppressed pistol away from the man on the ground before sheathing her knife. "I'm out. Vance. Honorably discharged. I don't do ghost work anymore." "No, you're a mother now. A mother who is $200,000 in medical debt and out of time," Vance said, stepping deeper into the alley. He didn't look threatened. He looked like a man holding all the cards. "I spoke with Dr. Evans. Tragic. Really. Connor's condition is deteriorating rapidly." "Keep my son's name out of your mouth," Angela warned, taking a step forward, her fists clenched so tight her knuckles turned white. "I'm not here to threaten your son, Angela. I'm here to save him." Vance stopped a few feet away and held out the manila folder. "The agency has assets. Unofficial assets. We have a heart, Angela. A perfect match for Connor. It's currently on ice in a private facility in Geneva, waiting for a recipient with his exact, rare genetic markers. We can have it flown here by tomorrow morning. Best surgical team in the country. Fully paid for." Angela stared at the folder, her breath catching in her throat. A heart. A life for her little boy. The desperation clawed at her chest, fighting against the ingrained paranoia of her past life. "Nothing is free, Vance. Especially not from you," she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "What's the price?" Vance smiled. A cold, empty gesture. "One last job. We have a target that has proven elusive to our standard operational teams. He is heavily guarded, paranoid, and extremely dangerous. We need a ghost. We need the woman who cleared an entire compound in Bogotá with nothing but a combat knife and 2 flashbangs. I don't kill for you anymore." "You don't," Vance agreed softly, "but you will kill for him." He nodded toward the hospital in the distance. "It's a simple transaction. Angie, you eliminate the target. The heart goes into Connor's chest. And you both disappear. Fully funded. Fresh identities. You say no, and I walk away. Connor's heart stops beating by the end of the week. And you get to watch the light leave his eyes." The rain fell harder, soaking through her clothes, but Angela felt nothing. The ultimatum hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. It wasn't a choice. It had never been a choice. To save a life, she had to take one. Her soul for her son's future. With a trembling hand, she reached out and snatched the wet folder from Vance's grip. "Good girl," Vance murmured. "The target is currently in a heavily fortified penthouse in downtown Chicago. Flight leaves in 2 hours. All the intel is in there." Vance turned and walked back to his waiting SUV. The man on the ground scrambled up and limped after him. The heavy doors slammed shut, and the vehicle vanished into the rainy Seattle night, leaving Angela alone in the dark. She stood there for a long time, the rain washing over her. Slowly, she opened the folder. Inside was a single photograph of a man, his face captured by a telephoto lens, along with pages of heavily redacted documents. She stared at the target's face, the man she had to murder to save her son. Little did she know, the man staring back at her from the photograph wasn't just a mark. He was the one man on Earth whose existence was intricately, fatally tied to the very heart her son needed. The game had just begun, and the rules were about to be shattered in blood. The locker at the self-storage facility in Sodo hadn't been opened in 5 years. When Angela rolled up the corrugated metal door, the smell of dust, dried leather, and gun oil hit her like a physical blow. It was the scent of a life she had sworn to leave behind the day Connor was born. She stepped into the small, windowless concrete box and pulled the chain on the overhead bulb. In the center of the room sat a heavy pelican case. Angela dropped to one knee, her fingers moving with muscle memory as she punched the 6-digit code into the padlocks. Click, click. She threw the latches and opened the lid. Dark, custom-cut foam held her past life in perfect, chilling preservation. She didn't hesitate. The clock in her head was ticking, synchronized with the failing beats of her son's heart. She stripped off her civilian clothes and pulled on a dark gray, form-fitting tactical suit, woven with Kevlar threading. She strapped a holster to her right thigh, sliding in a customized, matte black Heckler & Koch USP compact with a threaded barrel. Next came the suppressor, locking into place with a satisfying, metallic snap. She slid extra magazines into her tactical vest, re-sheathed her karambit at her waist, and grabbed a coiled matte black climbing rope. By the time she looked up at the small mirror hanging on the wall, the desperate mother was gone. The woman staring back had cold, dead eyes. She was a weapon, unspooled and ready to fire. 4 hours later, Angela was stepping off a red-eye flight at O'Hare International. The Chicago wind howled across the tarmac, biting and relentless, carrying the freezing promise of an incoming storm. Perfect weather for a ghost. According to Vance's dossier, the target was a man named Julian Hayes, billionaire tech mogul, reclusive, heavily guarded. The file claimed Hayes was secretly brokering next-generation bioweapons on the black market. Vance painted him as a monster, a man who profited off mass casualties. Target is paranoid, the file read. Never leaves his penthouse at the apex of the Ethelgard Tower. Security is military grade. Armed private contractors on rotation. Retinal scanners. Thermal optics. The works. Angela sat in the back of a rented sedan, parked 3 blocks away from the towering glass and steel monolith that pierced the dark Chicago skyline. Rain lashed against the windshield. She raised a pair of high-powered, image-stabilizing binoculars, scanning the upper floors. Most infiltrators would look for a way up from the bottom. Angela knew the bottom was a meat grinder. You don't fight gravity and 30 floors of armed guards. You drop in from above. At 2 a.m., the city below was a blur of yellow headlights and wet asphalt. Angela stood on the roof of the adjacent corporate high-rise, 50 stories up. The wind here was a physical force, threatening to tear her off the edge. She hooked her climbing harness to the reinforced steel anchoring system she had quietly drilled into the concrete. She loaded a pneumatic line launcher, took aim at the darkened maintenance balcony of Hayes's penthouse 100 feet across the terrifying abyss, and pulled the trigger. The grappling hook sailed through the driving rain, wrapping securely around a structural steel beam on the target building. She pulled the line taut, locked her carabiner, and stepped off the edge. For 3 seconds, she was suspended over a 500-foot drop, the wind roaring in her ears, the rain blinding her. She pulled herself across the void, hand over hand, muscles burning, ignoring the primal scream of her own survival instincts. For Connor, she repeated the mantra in her head. For Connor. Her boots touched the cold steel of the penthouse balcony silently. She unclipped her harness and drew her suppressed pistol in one fluid motion. The balcony doors were reinforced smart glass, locked down by an electronic keypad. Angela pulled a small, military-grade decryption device from her vest, splicing it into the keypad's wiring. 30 seconds later, the light flipped from red to green. Click. She slid the door open just wide enough to slip inside, entering the lion's den. The penthouse was massive, an ultra-modern expanse of white marble, dark oak, and minimalist furniture. It was eerily quiet. She moved like a shadow, sweeping her pistol left to right, clearing the living room, the kitchen, the hallway. 2 heavily armed guards were stationed by the main elevator bank. Angela bypassed them entirely, slipping through the ventilation access corridor she had memorized from the building's blueprints. She reached the master study. The heavy oak door was slightly ajar. Warm, yellow light spilled out onto the hallway floor. Angela pressed her back against the wall. She mirrored the door, peering through the crack. There he was, Julian Hayes. He didn't look like a bioweapons dealer. He looked exhausted. He was sitting at a massive mahogany desk, his tie undone, sleeves rolled up, rubbing his temples. The room was littered with medical journals, structural chemical models, and whiteboards covered in complex biological equations. Angela tightened her grip on her pistol. She pushed the door open. Stepping into the room, she raised the weapon. aligning the glowing tritium sites perfectly with the center of Hayes's head. "Don't move," Angela commanded, her voice barely above a whisper. Yet it cut through the silence like a razor. Hayes froze. He didn't reach for a panic button. He didn't shout for his guards. He slowly raised his hands and turned his head to look at her. His eyes were wide, but not with the terror of a guilty man caught. It was a look of profound, crushing resignation. "Vance sent you, didn't he?" Hayes asked, his voice rough with fatigue. Angela didn't answer. She kept the gun steady. "Turn around. Hands behind your head. You don't understand what you're doing," Hayes said, keeping his hands raised but refusing to turn away. He looked directly into the barrel of her gun, then up into her cold eyes. "Vance doesn't want me dead because of what I'm selling. He wants me dead because of what I cured." "I don't care what you cured," Angela lied, the image of Connor's pale face flashing behind her eyes. "My only objective is your pulse stopping." "Then shoot me," Hayes said, his voice rising, a sudden, desperate fire igniting in his eyes. "But if you pull that trigger, the synthetic organic heart prototype I designed, the only one in existence capable of adapting to pediatric autoimmune rejection, dies with me. Vance doesn't have it, I do." Angela's finger, resting heavily on the trigger, suddenly went rigid, the breath caught violently in her throat. Hayes nodded slowly, seeing the fracture in her icy exterior. "He found my leverage, didn't he? Who are you trying to save? Soldier? Because Vance isn't going to give you that heart. He sent you here to destroy the man who built it." The gun in Angela's hand trembled for the first time in 5 years. The silence in the master study was heavier than the Chicago storm raging outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. Angela's finger hovered over the trigger of her HK-USP compact. For 5 years, her aim had been an extension of her iron will. Now, the barrel wavered. Pediatric autoimmune rejection. How could he know the exact phrasing? That wasn't in Vance's dossier. That was a phrase buried deep in Connor's heavily encrypted medical files at Seattle Children's. "Step away from the desk," Angela ordered, her voice regaining its icy, commanding edge, though the tremor in her chest betrayed her. "Show me proof, now, or I put a bullet between your eyes and take my chances with Vance." Julian Hayes slowly lowered his hands, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. He tapped a sequence on a sleek, biometric keyboard. A massive holographic display sprang to life, bathing the room in a cool blue glow. "Project Aegis," Hayes breathed, his eyes fixed on the rotating 3D model of a human heart. It wasn't organic tissue, but a marvel of synthetic biology, woven with nanofibers and microprocessors. "I spent 6 years developing it. It's designed to bypass the body's natural immune response. It doesn't trigger antibodies, it adapts." He swiped a finger across the screen, pulling up a secondary file. Angela's breath hitched. There, glowing on the screen of a man she had been sent to kill, was a photograph of Connor. "Vance hacked my servers 2 weeks ago," Hayes explained rapidly, sensing the tectonic shift in the room's dynamic. "He found my short list of potential pediatric candidates for the first human trial. Your son was at the top of the list. Angela, he's the perfect genetic match for the prototype. Vance didn't have the heart, he just had the data. He used your son to manipulate you into eliminating the only man who knows how to initialize the organ." Angela stared at her son's face on the monitor. The betrayal was absolute. It tasted like battery acid in the back of her throat. Vance had played her. He was going to let her kill Hayes. Then let Connor die anyway to tie up loose ends. "Where is it?" she snapped, lowering her weapon by a fraction of an inch. "Where is the prototype?" "Secure vault. Sub-level 4 of my research facility in." A sudden, sharp beep cut him off. The blue light of the holographic display flickered, then died. In a synchronized cascade, every light in the penthouse went pitch black. The hum of the climate control ceased. EMP. Angela's combat instincts overrode her shock in a microsecond. She grabbed Hayes by the collar of his expensive dress shirt, dragging him violently to the floor behind the massive mahogany desk just as the heavy oak door of the study splintered inward. Thwip, thwip, thwip. 3 suppressed rounds chewed through the leather chair Hayes had been sitting in a moment before, the supersonic cracks echoing in the dark. "Vance's cleaners," Angela hissed, slipping a pair of sleek, low-profile night vision goggles over her eyes. The room snapped back into view in a wash of stark, monochromatic green. She wasn't the assassin. She was the patsy. Vance had sent a wet work team right behind her to ensure neither she nor Hayes made it out of the Aethelgard Tower alive. "Stay down. Do not move. Do not breathe," she commanded Hayes. Angela slid out from behind the desk, her movements completely silent on the plush carpet. 2 heavily armored mercenaries were sweeping the room, their laser sights cutting through the darkness. They moved with military precision, clearing the corners. They were looking for a panicked billionaire, not a Tier 1 operative fighting for her son's life. She flanked the point man. As he passed a towering bookshelf, Angela struck. She lunged from the shadows, her left hand violently redirecting the barrel of his assault rifle upward while her right hand drove the butt of her pistol into his temple. The crunch of bone was sickeningly loud. Before he hit the floor, she spun, using his falling body as a shield. The second mercenary fired, his rounds thudding heavily into the Kevlar of his fallen comrade. Angela dropped to one knee, leveled her H&K, and squeezed the trigger twice. Peefed, peefed, double tap to the central nervous system. The second man collapsed, his weapon clattering against the marble floor. The penthouse was silent again, save for the howling wind outside. Angela ripped the radio earpiece from the first mercenary's helmet and pressed it to her ear. Static crackled, followed by a harsh, synthesized voice. "Team Alpha. Status? Did the ghost take the bait? Do you have visual on right and the target?" She crushed the earpiece under her boot. There was no time. She turned back to Hayes, hauling him to his feet. In the green glow of her optics, the billionaire looked terrified but remarkably composed. He hadn't screamed. "Change of plans, Hayes," Angela said, ejecting her half-empty magazine and slamming a fresh one home with a sharp click. "Vance wants us both in body bags. If you die, my son dies. So, congratulations. I'm your new head of security. There are at least a dozen more men out there." Hayes swallowed hard, adjusting his glasses. "The elevators are locked down. The stairwells are fatal funnels. How do we get out?" Angela looked past him, toward the shattered balcony doors where the Chicago rain was violently whipping into the room. She remembered the sheer 500-foot drop and the single climbing line she had shot across the abyss. "You're a tech genius, right?" Angela asked, a grim, adrenaline-fueled smirk playing on her lips. "Yes? I hope you're not afraid of heights." She grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the howling vortex of the storm. "We're taking the express route." The Chicago wind wasn't just blowing, it was screaming. As Angela pushed Julian Hayes out onto the shattered glass of the penthouse balcony, the gale force gusts hit them like a physical wall. The rain was practically horizontal, stinging their faces like frozen needles. 50 stories below, the city was a dizzying, blurred mosaic of streetlights and moving headlights. Up here, it was a dark, violent void. Angela grabbed the heavy, matte black climbing line she had anchored to the balcony railing earlier. It stretched taut across the 100-foot chasm, connecting them to the darkened rooftop of the corporate high-rise next door. "Put this on, now," Angela barked over the roar of the storm, shoving a spare tactical carabiner and a makeshift webbing loop into Hayes's chest. Hayes looked down at the street, his face going a sickening shade of pale. His hands shook violently as he fumbled with the locking mechanism. "This isn't a zipline, right? It's a static rope. We don't have pulleys. We have friction, gravity, and Kevlar gloves," Angela yelled back, seamlessly clipping her own harness onto the line. She grabbed his harness, checking the lock with a brutal tug. "You wrap your legs around the rope. You hold on to my vest. You do not let go, or you will fall for 10 straight seconds before you hit the pavement. Do you understand?" Behind them, deep inside the darkened penthouse, the unmistakable crash of a tactical breaching charge echoed. Vance's kill squad had blown the secondary security doors. They were seconds away. "They're coming," Hayes panicked, his eyes darting back toward the master study. "Look at me." Angela grabbed his face with both hands, her cold, hardened gaze piercing through his panic. "Are you going to save my son?" Hayes swallowed hard, the rain plastering his silver hair to his forehead. He nodded once. "Yes." "Then trust me." Flashlights sliced through the darkness of the living room inside. Shouts echoed. Angela didn't give Hayes another second to think. She clamped her gloved hands over the wet rope, hooked her legs over the line, and pulled Hayes with her. They went over the edge. The drop was stomach-churning. For a split second, there was nothing but the terrifying sensation of freefall before the climbing rope caught their combined weight. The line groaned under the immense strain, sagging deeply into the abyss. "Move," Angela grunted, her muscles screaming as she began to pull them across the void hand over hand. Hayes clung to the back of her tactical vest, his legs wrapped awkwardly around the slick rope, his eyes squeezed shut. The wind battered them relentlessly, swinging them like a pendulum over the deadly drop. Every inch was an agonizing battle against the storm. Back on the penthouse balcony, 3 figures clad in black tactical gear breached the shattered glass doors. The leader spotted the tensioned rope and the 2 figures suspended halfway across the chasm. Target acquired. Fire. Crack crack. Supersonic rounds zipped past Angela's ears, snapping the air like angry hornets. One bullet ricocheted off the steel beam of the adjacent building, showering sparks into the night. Another tore through the loose fabric of Hayes's suit jacket. "They're shooting at us," Hayes screamed, pure terror tearing his voice apart. "Don't look back. Keep your head down," Angela roared. She channeled every ounce of her Tier 1 training, ignoring the burning in her shoulders, the numbness in her fingers, and the primal fear of the drop. 30 feet, 20 feet, 10 feet. Another volley of suppressed fire rained down. A round grazed Angela's left bicep, a hot, searing streak of pain that she immediately filed away in the back of her mind. Pain meant she was still alive. Pain meant Connor still had a chance. With a final, desperate heave, Angela propelled them over the concrete parapet of the adjacent high-rise. They crashed onto the unforgiving gravel roof in a tangled heap, gasping for air. Angela didn't stay down. She rolled onto her back, whipped her karambit from its sheath, and slashed violently upward. The curved, carbon steel blade severed the taut climbing rope in a single, brutal stroke. The heavy line snapped back with a sharp crack, whipping across the chasm and slapping uselessly against the glass of the Ethelgard Tower. Vance's men were stranded on the other side. Angela scrambled to her feet, grabbing Hayes by the arm and hauling him up. "Move to the stairwell. They'll call in a chopper or ground support within 2 minutes. We are officially ghosts in a hostile grid." Hayes limped alongside her, coughing, completely drenched and shivering. He looked at the woman who had just dragged him across the sky. "You're bleeding," he panted, pointing a trembling finger at the tear in her suit where the bullet had grazed her arm. Angela didn't even look at it. She kicked open the heavy metal door of the roof access stairwell. "It's not my blood that matters right now. Where is the facility, Hayes?" "Fox River," he gasped as they began the agonizing descent down the concrete stairs. "It's an old, decommissioned subterranean data center, 30 miles outside the city limits. The prototype is in a cryogenic stasis pod in sub-level 4. Can you remote access the security?" "No." Hayes shook his head, wiping the rain from his glasses. "It's entirely air-gapped, hardwired. The only way in is with my biometrics. And the only way to initialize the Aegis heart for your son is for me to manually code the sequence on site." Angela's mind raced, calculating distances, response times, and tactical disadvantages. Vance would lock down the city. The police scanners would soon be flooded with reports of a shootout at the Ethelgard Tower. They needed a vehicle, they needed medical supplies, and they needed to disappear before the sun came up. "All right," Angela said, her voice echoing in the cold stairwell. She pulled her secondary weapon, a compact 9mm, and handed it to the billionaire. "Safety is off. Point and pull if anyone who isn't me comes through a door." Hayes took the gun awkwardly, staring at it like it was an alien artifact. "I build things, right? I don't kill people." Angela stopped on the landing, turning to look him dead in the eye. The cold, mechanical killer Vance had hired was completely gone, replaced by a mother whose eyes burned with a fierce, terrifying light. "Neither do I, Hayes," she said softly. "Not anymore. Tonight, we're just saving a life. Now keep moving." Parking level B3 of the corporate building was bathed in flickering fluorescent light and the acrid stench of motor oil mixed with damp concrete. The hurried footsteps of Angela and Hayes echoed against the drab, gray walls. "We can't use the newer models," Angela whispered, her ice-cold eyes sweeping across the rows of luxury vehicles. "Anything manufactured after 2015 has built-in GPS and telematics. Vance's team would have a lock on us in under 3 minutes." Her gaze locked onto a dark corner. A 1987 Chevrolet Nova sat under a thin layer of dust, likely belonging to a maintenance worker. Its dull, faded gray paint job was the perfect camouflage for tonight. "Get in," Angela ordered. She drew her karambit, using the heavy pommel to deliver a precise strike to the corner of the driver's side window. The tempered glass shattered into tiny cubes without a loud crash. She reached in, popped the lock, slid into the driver's seat, and quickly slashed the plastic housing under the steering column. Hayes hurried around to the passenger side and climbed in, his whole body still shivering from the freezing storm and the sheer terror of the apex drop. He gripped the 9mm pistol in his hands like it was his only lifeline. It took exactly 8 seconds for Angela to strip and cross the ignition wires. The old V8 engine roared to life with a deep, throaty rumble as the muscle car tore out of the subterranean garage and merged into the torrential rain of the Chicago streets. Angela finally allowed herself to exhale a single breath. Keeping one hand steady on the wheel, she used the other to rip away the shredded fabric of her tactical sleeve. The bullet graze on her left bicep was deeper than she had thought. Fresh blood was seeping out, mixing with the freezing rainwater. "You need a hospital," Hayes said, his voice tight as he stared at the ragged wound. "If I walk into a hospital tonight, we both end up in the morgue tomorrow morning." Angela replied flatly. She reached into the back seat, pulling a small blowout kit from the pocket of a spare jacket. She bit the cap off a tube of medical-grade cyanoacrylate, super glue, leaned over, and squeezed the chemical directly into the open gash. Angela's facial muscles twitched, her jaw clenching so hard she tasted copper, violently fighting back a groan. It burned like hellfire, but the glue instantly catalyzed, sealing the wound and stopping the bleed. She hastily wrapped a few tight layers of silver duct tape around her bicep, then tossed the roll into the back. Done. She exhaled sharply, pressing harder on the accelerator. The Chevy surged forward toward the highway leading to Fox River. "Now, tell me, what does Vance actually want with that prototype heart? Why kill you instead of just stealing it?" Hayes took off his glasses, wiping the fog from the lenses with his soaked shirt. Deep exhaustion lined the billionaire's face. "Vance doesn't work for the government, Angela. At least, not anymore," Hayes began, his voice dropping. "He runs a shadow private military corporation. The core tech behind Project Aegis. The project I built to save terminally ill children like your son. It has a unique capability. It doesn't just adapt to the host's body, it can optimize blood flow, completely eliminating muscle fatigue." Angela glanced at Hayes in the rearview mirror, her razor-sharp military mind instantly connecting the dots. "He doesn't want to save lives. He wants to use it to create super soldiers." "Exactly," Hayes nodded bitterly. "An army that never gets tired, never fatigues on the battlefield. He's already signed black book deals worth billions with some of the world's most brutal dictators. But there's a catch. The first prototype, the one sitting in Fox River, is bio-encrypted and micro-programmed specifically for a child's DNA structure. Specifically, Connor's DNA." Angela's heart skipped a beat. Her hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned bone white. "If Vance gets his hands on that prototype now, he'll dissect it, reverse engineering the tech for a military-grade version. And your son? He'll die because the only prototype compatible with him will be destroyed." Hayes looked directly into Angela's eyes. "That's why I never handed it over. And that's why he needs me dead, to wipe the slate clean and steal the research." Outside, lightning violently slashed across the Chicago night sky. Angela slammed the gas pedal to the floor. Her eyes no longer just held the cold detachment of an assassin, they burned with the absolute, raging fury of a mother. Vance had turned her son into a pawn on his billion-dollar chessboard. And tonight, she was going to flip the entire board. "How far to Fox River?" Angela asked, her voice sharp as a dagger. 30 miles, Hayes replied, checking his watch. But the security there is fully automated. Sentry turrets. Motion sensors. I don't care. Angela interrupted, racking the slide of her sidearm one-handed. Even if it's hell down there. We're bringing that heart out. The Fox River facility didn't look like a billion-dollar black site. From the outside, nestled deep within a thick, overgrown pine forest 30 miles past the Chicago city limits, it looked like a derelict water treatment plant. Chain-link fences sagged under the weight of rusted barbed wire. The concrete was cracked, choked by creeping ivy. But Angela knew better. She parked the stolen Chevy Nova half a mile down a washed-out logging road, hiding it beneath a canopy of dense, weeping branches. "Don't let the rust fool you," Hayes whispered, his breath pluming in the freezing air as they crouched behind a rotting fallen oak. Surveying the perimeter, everything above ground is a stage set. The real facility is buried 4 stories deep in solid bedrock. Through her night vision optics, Angela studied the tree line. Thermal grid? Interlocking, Hayes confirmed, shivering violently in his soaked suit. Anything with a body temperature over 60 degrees Fahrenheit crosses that fence line. And the automated sentries open up. They fire .50 caliber depleted uranium rounds. They don't just kill you, they vaporize you. Angela lowered her optics. She reached into her tactical vest and pulled out 2 ultra-thin silver Mylar emergency blankets. Good thing we're already freezing to death. She tossed one to Hayes. Wrap it tight around your core and head. It'll trap your body heat just enough to ghost the thermals. Step exactly where I step. If I stop, you stop. If I drop, you drop. Are we clear? Hayes swallowed hard, wrapping the crinkling silver foil around his shoulders like a bizarre metallic cloak. Clear. They moved. The rain had turned the forest floor into a muddy slick. But Angela navigated it with lethal grace. She kept her eyes locked on the invisible geometric patterns she knew the thermal scanners would be sweeping. They slipped through a gap in the rusted fence, their Mylar blankets masking their heat signatures just enough to blend in with the freezing ambient temperature of the storm. They reached the heavy, reinforced steel access door built into the side of a faux concrete pumping station. "Biometrics," Hayes whispered, stepping forward. He pressed his right thumb against a concealed scanner disguised as a rusted electrical panel. Next, he leaned in, letting a hidden retinal laser sweep his eye. A heavy, hydraulic hiss broke the silence. The steel door slid back, revealing a stark, blindingly white corridor that plunged into the earth at a steep angle. The contrast between the rotting exterior and the hyper-sterile, ultra-modern interior was jarring. "Sub-level 4, Hayes breathed, stepping inside. Angela followed, her suppressed H&K raised and ready. Her eyes darting across every sleek panel and recessed ceiling seam. The descent was agonizingly quiet. The elevator was disabled, a standard lockdown protocol, forcing them to take the spiraling concrete maintenance stairs. With every floor they descended, the air grew colder, smelling of ozone and purified oxygen. As they reached the heavy blast doors of sub-level 3, a mechanical whir echoed through the stairwell. Angela froze. She threw an arm out, slamming Hayes back against the wall. "What is it?" he hissed. "Sentry," she mouthed. From the ceiling of the corridor ahead, a sleek, dual-barreled automated turret dropped from a concealed hatch. Its central optic glowed a menacing, pulsing red, sweeping the hallway with a laser grid. "It's tied to the internal motion trackers," Hayes panicked, his voice a frantic whisper. The mylar won't work in here. If we step into that corridor, it will cut us in half before my brain can even process the sound of the gunfire. Angela stared at the turret. The red laser swept left, then right, a perfect, rhythmic pendulum of death. Everything has a blind spot, she muttered. She checked her magazine. 14 rounds. Hayes, when I move, I'm going to draw its tracking logic. The second its barrels track left toward me, you sprint to the keypad on the far door and punch in your override code. Do not stop. Are you insane? It tracks at mil-spec speeds. It tracks a singular primary threat, Angela corrected, her eyes burning with a terrifying focus. I'm going to make sure I'm the biggest threat in the room. For Connor. She didn't give him time to argue. Angela exploded from cover. She didn't run, she dove, hitting the slick, sterile floor and sliding on her knees. The turret whirred instantly, the red optic snapping onto her. The deafening roar of the heavy machine guns filled the confined space. Chunks of concrete and white tiling erupted in a storm of shrapnel just inches behind Angela's sliding boots. She raised her pistol, not aiming for the heavily armored barrels, but for the fragile glass of the glowing red optic. Peefed, peefed, peefed. 3 suppressed rounds struck true. The glass shattered, the red light flickered violently, throwing sparks, and the turret's tracking system spasmed. It began firing wildly into the ceiling. Blinded. Hayes, now, Angela screamed over the deafening gunfire, rolling behind a reinforced concrete pillar as bullets rained down around her. Hayes bolted. He sprinted past the flailing turret, slamming into the blast doors of sub-level 4. His hands shook as he punched a frantic sequence of numbers into the keypad, followed by a palm scan. The keypad flashed green. The heavy vault doors began to slide open. Angela broke from cover, sprinting toward the opening. She dove through the gap just as the blinded sentry turret finally self-corrected, sending a volley of bullets sparking against the closing titanium doors. Boom! The doors sealed shut. The roaring gunfire was instantly muted to a dull, distant thud. They were in. The vault was massive, bathed in a soft, ethereal blue light. The air was freezing, biting at their lungs. In the dead center of the room, resting atop a glowing, cylindrical pedestal, was a cryogenic stasis pod. Hayes walked toward it, his face filled with a mixture of awe and heavy sorrow. He tapped a command onto the pod's interface. The frosted glass hissed, sliding back to reveal the prize. It was roughly the size of a child's fist. A synthetic marvel of biomechanical engineering, woven with translucent nanofibers and microvalves. It didn't look like a machine, it looked organic, beautiful, and utterly perfect. It was life. It was a future. It was Connor's heartbeat. Angela walked up to the pod, her breath catching in her throat. The hardened soldier melted away, leaving only a mother staring at her son's salvation. A single tear broke free, mixing with the rain and blood on her cheek. We need to initialize the biolock for Connor's DNA right now. And put it in the transport cooler, Hayes said softly, reaching for a specialized thermal briefcase at the base of the pedestal. Before Angela could reply, the vault's ambient blue lights suddenly flashed violently to a glaring, warning red. A harsh, synthesized klaxon began to wail. Warning, external breach detected, sub-level 1 compromised. Angela's head snapped toward the security monitors mounted on the far wall. The thermal cameras above ground were lighting up, not with one or two heat signatures, but with dozens. 3 heavily armed tactical transport helicopters were touching down in the clearing outside the facility. Dozens of men in black combat gear were swarming the entrance. And leading them, stepping out of a black transport with an umbrella shielding him from the rain, was Marcus Vance. He didn't track the car. Angela realized, her blood running cold as she pulled the slide back on her pistol. He tracked the power surge when you opened this vault. They were 50 feet underground, locked in a vault, with a private army descending upon them. The real war had just begun. The blaring red klaxon of the vault's security system was deafening, a synthetic scream that drowned out the pounding of Angela's own heart. On the security monitors, Vance's private army was moving with terrifying, synchronized precision. They were sweeping the ground floor, planting breaching charges on the elevator shaft, and flooding the stairwells. They had less than 3 minutes before sub-level 4 became a slaughterhouse. Hayes, the heart, Angela shouted over the alarm, her eyes darting around the massive, reinforced concrete vault. Initialize the biolock to Connor's DNA and get it in the transport case. Now. Julian Hayes snapped out of his paralyzed state. He threw himself at the cryogenic POD's interface, his fingers flying across the holographic keyboard in a frantic blur. I'm bypassing the secondary encryption. It needs 60 seconds to sync with the genetic markers from your son's file. We don't have 60 seconds. Angela racked the slide of her H&K. Checking the chamber. She had 14 rounds in her primary. 7 in the 9mm she had given Hayes, and her karambit. Outside the thick titanium vault doors, she could already hear the heavy, muffled thuds of combat boots hitting the grated floor of sub-level 3. They were setting up outside the door. You built a billion-dollar doomsday bunker for a biomechanical heart, Angela said, grabbing Hayes by the shoulder and spinning him around. Tell me you didn't leave us trapped in a dead-end box. Where is the armory? Where is the back door? Hayes swallowed hard, sweat beading on his forehead despite the freezing temperature of the vault. The wall behind the pod. It's not structural. It's a localized armory. Code is 0451. Angela didn't walk, she sprinted. She hit the seamless white panel behind the pod, punching the 4 digits into a nearly invisible keypad. A heavy mechanical clunk echoed, and the wall hissed open, sliding horizontally to reveal a hidden, matte black cache. It wasn't just an armory. It was a war room. Resting on the illuminated racks were 2 customized SIG MCX Virtus assault rifles, a row of incendiary and flashbang grenades, and sleek, level 4 ceramic plate carriers. Hayes hadn't just built a lab, he had prepared for a siege. I'm a paranoid man, right? Hayes muttered, his eyes glued to the POD's downloading progress bar. 45%. Paranoia just kept you breathing, Angela replied. She stripped off her soaked tactical vest and threw on the heavy plate carrier, securing the Velcro straps tight against her ribs. She grabbed one of the SIG MCX rifles, slapping a 30-round magazine of 5.56mm armor-piercing rounds into the mag well, and racked the charging handle. The heavy, metallic clack of the bolt sliding home was the sweetest sound she had heard all night. She clipped 3 flashbangs to her belt and stuffed extra magazines into her pouches. Suddenly, the center of the massive titanium vault door began to hiss. A blinding, searing white light pierced through the heavy metal. Thermite. Vance's men weren't trying to hack the keypad. They were burning straight through the locking mechanism with a thermal breaching torch. The temperature in the room spiked instantly. The smell of melting titanium and ozone filling the air. Hayes. Status. Angela barked, raising the rifle and leveling the holographic sight squarely at the glowing, melting center of the door. 80%. Hayes yelled back, his hands shaking as he grabbed the specialized thermal briefcase. The evacuation tunnel is beneath the floor grates. It leads directly to the subterranean runoff of the actual Fox River. There's a motorized Zodiac raft down there. Pop the grate. Get the case ready, Angela ordered, her voice eerily calm. The Tier 1 operator had completely taken over. Her breathing slowed, her heart rate steadied. She was no longer prey. She was the apex predator. And Vance's men were breaking into her cage. 90%. The thermite burned hotter, melting a perfect circle through the 3-inch titanium. 95%. Hayes grabbed a crowbar from the armory and jammed it into the seam of the heavy floor grate behind the pedestal, using all his body weight to pry it open. Below, the dark, rushing sound of freezing river water echoed up. 100%. The cryogenic pod beeped, a sharp, clear, green chime. The biolock was complete. The Aegis heart now belonged exclusively to Connor Wright. If it was placed in anyone else's chest, it would immediately shut down. Hayes grabbed the glowing, synthetic heart, his hands surprisingly steady as he placed it into the custom-molded gel of the thermal briefcase. He slammed the lid shut. Click. I got it, Hayes shouted, strapping the briefcase tightly across his chest. Get in the hole, Angela roared. The thermite finished its burn. The heavy, molten center of the vault door was kicked inward with a deafening crash. Smoke and sparks billowed into the freezing vault. Through the dense smoke, the red laser sights of 3 heavily armored mercenaries cut through the haze. Angela didn't wait for them to acquire a target. She pulled the pin on a flashbang and hurled it through the breached hole. Bang! The blinding flash and ear-shattering concussion rocked the corridor outside. The mercenaries screamed, blinded and disoriented. Angela stepped out from behind the pedestal. Her SIG MCX raised. She squeezed the trigger, firing controlled, brutal 3-round bursts. The armor-piercing rounds tore through the smoke, dropping the first 2 mercenaries before they even knew where the fire was coming from. The third blindly returned fire, his bullets sparking harmlessly against the thick concrete walls. Angela shifted her aim and dropped him with a clean shot to the chest. Go, 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 Angela yelled, backing toward the open floor grate while keeping her rifle trained on the smoking breach. Hayes scrambled down the rusted iron ladder into the pitch black, rushing dampness of the underground river tunnel. Just as Angela reached the edge of the hole, a figure stepped through the smoldering breach. He wasn't wearing tactical gear. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, an umbrella casually resting on his shoulder, completely unfazed by the carnage around him. Marcus Vance. He looked at the dead men at his feet, then looked across the vault at Angela. He didn't raise a weapon. He just smiled, a cold, calculating smirk. You always were the best, Angie. Vance's aristocratic baritone cut through the ringing silence. But you can't outrun a ghost. I own the skies. I own the roads. You bring that heart up to the surface, and my men will take it from your cold, dead hands. Your son is already dead. You just haven't accepted it yet. Angela stopped. She looked at the man who had turned her life into a living hell. The man who was willing to let her 7-year-old boy suffocate just to build a better weapon. She didn't scream. She didn't curse him. She calmly raised her rifle, aiming center mass, and squeezed the trigger. Click. Empty magazine. In the chaos of the suppressing fire, she had run dry. Vance's smile widened. 2 more heavily armored mercenaries stepped out from behind him, raising their assault rifles. "Say hello to your boy for me," Vance murmured. Angela didn't flinch. She simply hit the magazine release, letting the empty mag drop to the floor. With her free hand, she reached to her tactical belt, unclipped her second flashbang, and tossed it not at Vance, but directly at the master lighting grid above the vault. "See you in the dark, Vance," she whispered. Bang! The explosion shattered the lighting array. The vault plunged into absolute, pitch-black darkness. In the microsecond before the mercenaries fired blindly into the void, Angela dropped backward into the open floor grate, disappearing into the rushing depths of the Fox River. The fall felt endless in the pitch-black void. Then, they hit the surface. The water of the subterranean Fox River wasn't just cold, it was freezing, piercing through Angela's tactical armor like 1,000 icy needles, biting deep into her bones. The brutal impact knocked the wind out of her lungs, but her Tier 1 survival instincts instantly kicked in. She kicked hard, breaking the black surface of the water, gasping a lungful of air that tasted of damp moss and mud. "Hayes!" Angela shouted, her voice echoing eerily against the wet limestone walls of the cavern. 10 feet away, a figure was thrashing. Julian Hayes surfaced, pale and coughing violently, but his arms were wrapped in a death grip around the thermal briefcase containing Connor's heart, holding it to his chest like a life preserver. I'm here," Hayes stammered, his teeth chattering uncontrollably. Angela swam over with strong, even strokes, grabbing the billionaire by his collar and dragging him toward the shallow edge of the cavern. Under the dim beam of the waterproof tactical light mounted on her shoulder, a pitch-black Zodiac inflatable boat was tethered to an iron mooring post. Its motor was a silent electromagnetic drive, no noise, no thermal exhaust, the perfect getaway vehicle. "Get in, now," Angela ordered, shoving Hayes over the rubber pontoon before hauling herself aboard. She drew her karambit and slashed the thick mooring line. Her bleeding hand slammed the throttle forward. The Zodiac surged, tearing through the narrow, winding underground tunnel. The rapid current pulled them deeper into the earth, leaving behind the faint shouts of Vance's mercenaries at the mouth of the shaft. "Are we safe?" Hayes gasped, curled up in the bow of the boat, his eyes wide with terror as he stared into the endless dark ahead. "Not yet," Angela replied coldly, her eyes narrowed, intensely focused on steering the boat past razor-sharp stalactites. "Vance isn't a quitter. He knows this tunnel empties into the main branch of the Fox River. He'll cast a net at the exit." 15 minutes passed in agonizing tension. The roar of rushing water grew louder, signaling their escape from the subterranean depths. A biting gust of wind, carrying the scent of impending snow, hit their faces. Then, the cavern opened up. The gray, storm-choked Chicago night sky loomed above. But they weren't alone. The moment the Zodiac slipped out of the cavern's shadows and merged into the broad current of the main river, the water around them erupted in blinding white light. Whir! 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 The deafening shriek of rotor blades tore through the wind, 3 heavy military-grade drones, equipped with thermal optics and high-powered spotlights, were hovering right above them like birds of prey, their beams locked dead onto the black boat. Target confirmed. Weapons free. A synthesized voice blared from a loudspeaker on the lead drone. Get your head down, Angela roared. She wrenched the tiller hard. At the exact same moment, streaks of angry red tracer fire from the drone's automated machine guns ripped through the night, chewing up the water right where the boat had been a split second before. Geysers of water erupted into the air. Hayes curled into a tight ball, clutching the briefcase to his chest, squeezing his eyes shut as he braced for death. But Angela didn't run. She couldn't outrun a drone. She shifted her weight, bracing her boot against the gunnel for stability, and brought up her reloaded SIG MCX Virtus. The first drone swooped low, lining up for a strafing run. Angela didn't aim for the armored chassis. She peered through her holographic sight, leading her target, and put her crosshairs directly on the fragile left rotor assembly. Bang, bang, bang. 3 armor-piercing rounds cut through the air. The rotor shattered. The drone violently pitched, spinning out of control before slamming into the water, erupting into a brilliant fireball. The remaining 2 instantly scattered, adjusting their attack vectors. Angela, watch out! Hayes screamed as the spotlight of the second drone blinded her. A burst of machine gun fire hammered the reinforced rubber hull of the Zodiac. 1 round grazed Angela's shoulder pauldron, leaving a scorch mark. Hold onto that case. Angela gritted her teeth, keeping one hand on the tiller and pushing the throttle to the max. The Zodiac barreled straight toward the steep cliff face lining the riverbank. She waited until the second drone was right on her tail, dropping altitude to fire. In a split-second decision, Angela cut the wheel violently. The boat skidded sideways across the water, kicking up a massive wake. The drone, flying too fast to match the hairpin turn, slammed head-on into the jagged cliff. Metal shrieked and crumpled, raining flaming debris into the dark river. The third drone hovered hesitantly, as if its automated targeting system was calculating the sheer ferocity of its prey. Angela didn't give it the chance. She shouldered her rifle and held the trigger down until the bolt locked back on an empty magazine. The final drone took a cluster of rounds directly to its central battery housing. It sparked wildly, caught fire, and plummeted into the freezing depths. The night and the silence reclaimed the river, leaving only the quiet hum of the electric motor as the Zodiac glided through the darkness. Angela lowered her weapon, breathing heavily. Her left bicep had started bleeding again, and cold sweat beaded on her forehead. She steered the boat toward a muddy embankment beneath a towering, abandoned highway overpass. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice raspy, glancing at Hayes. The billionaire shakily lifted his head, his face smeared with mud. He slowly cracked the briefcase open. Nestled in the protective gel, the artificial heart still emitted a soft blue glow, its microbeats perfectly steady. "It's safe," Hayes exhaled, tears mixing with the rain on his face. "But Vance knows where we are. He'll lock down every airport, every train station, every highway out of Illinois. How are we supposed to get this back to Seattle for Connor before morning?" Angela looked up at the cracked concrete pillars of the overpass. Her eyes gleamed with the cold, ruthless iron will of a mother backed into a corner. "We aren't taking the roads. And we aren't flying commercial," Angela said, pulling out the encrypted military satellite phone she had stripped from the first mercenary back at the vault. It's time to call another ghost. Underneath the crumbling concrete of the abandoned I-55 overpass, the freezing Chicago rain finally gave way to a bitter, biting sleet. Angela Wright stood shivering, the wind howling around her as she punched a 12-digit sequence into the encrypted military satellite phone. Julian Hayes sat slumped against a concrete piling, clutching the thermal briefcase to his chest. He looked like a man who had aged a decade in a single night. The phone rang twice. A click. Then, a voice dripping with Texas drawl and static answered. The number you are trying to reach has been disconnected since the fall of Kabul. Hang up. I'm cashing it in, Jax, Angela said, her voice a raspy whisper cutting through the wind. The Kabul marker. I need wings. Right now. A long, heavy silence hung on the line. Angie? Hell, girl. The chatter on the encrypted bands is deafening tonight. Word is, Marcus Vance just put a $10 million bounty on a ghost. That ghost wouldn't happen to be you. Would it? Do you want the $10 million? Or do you want to pay off your debt? Another pause, followed by a heavy sigh. I don't need Vance's blood money. You got an extraction point? Where are you? Sitting on a decommissioned crop duster strip in Joliet. Got a gutted Gulfstream 4. Radar absorbent paint. Military-grade countermeasures. And twin Rolls-Royce turbofans that purr like a mountain lion. She ain't pretty, but she's a ghost. Spin them up, Jax. We're 20 minutes out. Angela crushed the sat phone under the heel of her boot, tossing the plastic remains into the dark river. She turned to Hayes. Get up, we're moving. They managed to hotwire a rusted Ford F-150 parked outside a closed auto parts store. The drive to Joliet was a white-knuckle blur of dodging police sirens and sticking to unlit, desolate back roads. Angela's left arm was throbbing with a dull, sickening heat, a sign the bullet graze was flirting with infection. But she locked the pain away in a mental vault. Connor first, pain later. When they tore through the rusted chain-link gates of the Joliet airstrip, the sleet had turned into a blinding snowstorm. Sitting at the far end of the cracked, weed-choked tarmac was a matte black Gulfstream jet. It had no tail numbers, no identifying marks. Standing by the lowered cabin stairs was Jackson Miller. He was wearing a grease-stained bomber jacket, chewing on an unlit cigar, and holding a customized short-barreled shotgun resting lazily over his shoulder. Hayes stumbled out of the truck, clutching the briefcase, looking up at the ominous black plane. This is our ride? It looks like it belongs in a salvage yard. Jax spit his cigar onto the tarmac and grinned. Billionaire Julian Hayes. Man, you look like hell. Don't insult my bird. Pocket protector. She can make Seattle in 3.5 hours. Cruising at 45,000 feet where air traffic control can't even dream of seeing us. Just get us in the air. Jax, Angela interrupted, grabbing the duffel bag of spare ammunition she had scavenged from the Fox River Armory. Engines are hot. Angie, get on board. Before Jax could finish his sentence, the distant, unmistakable roar of high-performance engines echoed over the howling wind. At the far end of the runway, 4 black SUVs smashed through the perimeter fence, their high beams cutting violently through the blizzard. They fanned out, tearing down the tarmac straight toward the Gulfstream. Vance's cleanup crew. They had tracked the stolen Ford Company. Jax yelled, racking the pump of his shotgun. Get in the plane. I gotta initiate the takeoff sequence from the cockpit. He scrambled up the stairs and disappeared into the cabin. Hayes, move. Angela shoved the billionaire up the aluminum steps. The lead SUV slammed on its brakes 50 yards out. Sliding sideways on the icy tarmac. The doors flew open, and 4 mercenaries piled out, raising assault rifles. Angela didn't retreat into the plane. She dropped to one knee at the top of the stairs, bracing her SIG MCX Virtus against the railing. Crack, crack, crack. Her 3-round burst shattered the windshield of the lead vehicle, dropping the driver, but the other SUVs were swarming, flanking the aircraft. Suppressing fire began to ping and spark against the Gulfstream's armored fuselage. Inside, the twin Rolls-Royce turbofans whined, quickly building to a deafening, earth-shaking roar. The jet began to roll forward, the landing gear crunching over the icy weeds. "Angie, close the damn door," Jax screamed over the intercom. "I'm punching the throttle." The plane jerked forward, accelerating down the runway. Angela laid down a final, punishing volley of suppressive fire, forcing the advancing mercenaries to duck behind their bullet-riddled vehicles. She hit the hydraulic retract button on the doorway panel. The stairs began to fold inward as the jet picked up terrifying speed. A mercenary stepped out from the storm, leveling a shoulder-fired rocket launcher directly at the plane's right engine. Time dilated. Angela dropped her empty rifle, drawing her customized H&K pistol in a fraction of a second. She didn't aim with her eyes, she aimed with years of muscle memory. She squeezed the trigger twice. The mercenary jerked backward as the rounds took him in the chest. The rocket misfired, launching wildly into the snowy sky and exploding harmlessly 100 yards above them. The cabin door slammed shut, sealing with a pressurized hiss. Angela collapsed against the bulkhead, her chest heaving, the adrenaline slowly draining from her system. The cabin tilted at a steep angle as Jax pulled back on the yoke. The G-force pressed her heavily into the floor. Within seconds, the turbulence smoothed out. They broke through the violent storm clouds and into the eerie, silent calm of the upper stratosphere. The moonlight flooded the cabin, casting long, pale shadows. Hayes was strapped into a leather seat across the aisle, his eyes closed, his breathing ragged. The thermal briefcase sat securely in his lap. Angela slowly pushed herself up and walked over to him. She popped the latches on the case. The biomechanical heart was still there, glowing with a soft, steady blue light. Thump thump, thump thump. It was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. It was the sound of a promise. She looked out the small, oval window at the stars stretching infinitely toward the west. Seattle was waiting. Connor was waiting. 3 hours, Angela whispered, resting her bloody hand gently on the edge of the briefcase. "Hold on, buddy. Mama's coming home." The descent into the Pacific Northwest was rough. The Gulfstream shuddered as it punched through the thick, gray storm clouds hanging heavy over Seattle. It was 4 a.m., and the city below was a sprawling grid of amber streetlights bleeding into the freezing, relentless rain. In the cockpit, Jax flipped a row of overhead switches, illuminating the cabin with a dim red tactical light. His voice crackled over the intercom, tight with stress. "Angie, we have a massive problem. I just tapped into the air traffic control frequencies. Boeing Field, SeaTac, even the small municipal strip in Renton, they're all crawling with unmarked black SUVs." Vance didn't just cast a net, He built a dam wall around the city. Angela unbuckled her harness and moved to the cockpit door. He knows the target is Seattle Children's. He's locking down the perimeter. If I put the landing gear down on any runway in this county, we'll be staring down the barrels of 50 assault rifles before the engines spool down. Jax warned, his hands gripping the yoke. I can't land this bird. Angie. Not without a war. Angela looked out the reinforced window at the dark, sprawling waters of Lake Washington. A crazy, desperate plan formulated in her tactical mind. You don't have to land, Angela said, her voice dropping to a dead calm register. You just have to get close to the ground. Fly low over the I-90 floating bridge. Eastbound. There's a 2-mile stretch with no overhead cables. Jax turned his head, staring at her like she had lost her mind. A touch and go on a public highway? In a heavy jet? You'll rip the landing gear off. I don't need you to touch down. I need you to drop the rear landing hatch at 50 feet and slow to stall speed. We're bailing out. Jax chewed his lip, looking at the fuel gauge, then back at the mother willing to do the impossible. 50 feet at 120 knots into freezing water. It's a suicide drop. It's the only way. Do it. Angela ran back to the cabin. She grabbed Hayes by the collar, hauling him out of his seat. She strapped a heavy, waterproof tactical bag to his chest, placing the thermal briefcase containing the Aegis heart securely inside it. Listen to me very carefully, Angela ordered, locking a carabiner from the bag to his harness. When the hatch opens, you jump, tuck your chin, cross your arms over the heart, and let the Kevlar vest take the impact of the water. I will be right behind you. Hayes looked absolutely terrified, but he nodded. The billionaire tech genius had finally realized that the only way to survive Angela Wright's world was absolute obedience. The jet violently pitched downward. Jax was bringing them in hot and low. The altimeter screamed its warning, terrain. Terrain. Pull up. Hiss. The rear hydraulic hatch dropped open. The roar of the jet engines and the freezing Seattle wind violently rushed into the cabin. Below them, the black, churning waters of Lake Washington blurred past at terrifying speed. The concrete pillars of the I-90 bridge loomed like monoliths in the darkness. Go! Angela screamed. She shoved Hayes out into the void and immediately dove out after him. The impact with the water felt like hitting a solid brick wall. The sheer velocity drove Angela deep beneath the surface, the freezing lake instantly paralyzing her lungs. She fought the shock, orienting herself in the black water, and kicked upward. She broke the surface, gasping for air. 100 yards away, the Gulf Stream pulled up sharply, its twin engines roaring as Jax climbed back into the storm, drawing Vance's radar attention away from the drop zone. Hayes, she choked out over the crashing waves. Here, a miserable voice sputtered 50 feet to her left. Hayes was bobbing in the water, his arms locked in a death grip around the waterproof bag strapped to his chest. Angela swam to him, grabbed the straps, and towed him toward the muddy embankment of the Mercer Island shoreline. They crawled out of the freezing water, collapsing into the wet reeds. But the clock in Angela's head was screaming. Connor's heart. They hijacked a delivery van idling outside a local bakery, ditching their soaking tactical vests. 10 minutes later, they were parked 2 blocks away from the towering, glass-fronted facade of Seattle Children's Hospital. Angela pulled a pair of compact binoculars from her remaining gear. The main entrance was lit up, but something was deeply wrong. The regular, friendly security guards were gone. In their place stood men in dark suits with earpieces, casually loitering near the automatic doors, the emergency room entrance, and the loading docks. "Vance owns the building," Hayes whispered, shivering violently. "How do we get to the ICU? We can't shoot our way through a pediatric ward." "We don't shoot," Angela replied, her voice cold and absolute. She ejected the magazine from her SIG assault rifle, cleared the chamber, and shoved the heavy weapon under the van seat. She pulled her suppressed 9mm and her karambit. "Loud weapons get kids killed. Tonight, we are ghosts." She led Hayes down a narrow, trash-filled alley beside the hospital. They bypassed the heavily guarded loading dock and approached a rusted grate set flush into the concrete, the subterranean steam tunnels that fed the hospital's heating matrix. Using her karambit, Angela popped the heavy iron grate. They dropped down into the sweltering, claustrophobic darkness, surrounded by hissing pipes and the smell of industrial cleaner. They navigated the maze of tunnels, using the blueprints Angela had memorized during her countless sleepless nights pacing the hospital floors. They reached the service elevator shaft directly beneath the third-floor ICU. Angela forced the elevator doors open and peered up the dark shaft. "Climb the maintenance ladder. Do not make a sound." They ascended silently. When they reached the third floor, Angela cracked the elevator doors open just an inch. The sterile, brightly lit hallway of the ICU was eerily quiet. The nurse's station was empty. Standing right outside room 314, Connor's room, were two massive men in tactical gear, holding suppressed submachine guns at the low ready. Vance wasn't just waiting for them. He had taken Connor hostage. Angela's vision tunneled. A cold, lethal fury settled over her. She turned to Hayes, putting a finger to her lips. She slipped through the gap in the elevator doors, melting into the shadows of a nearby linen cart. She needed to take out two heavily armed professionals simultaneously, in complete silence, before they could pull a trigger or alert their boss. She gripped the curved, carbon steel blade of her karambit. It was time to show Vance exactly why he should never have threatened a Tier 1 mother's child. The fluorescent lights of the ICU corridor buzzed with a low, sickening hum. To anyone else, it was just the sound of a hospital at night. To Angela Wright, it was a metronome ticking down the final seconds of her son's life. She crouched behind the heavy canvas of a laundry cart, her breathing practically non-existent. 30 feet down the pristine linoleum hallway stood the two mercenaries. They were big, disciplined, and wearing level 3 soft body armor beneath their tactical windbreakers. Their hands rested casually on the pistol grips of suppressed MP7 submachine guns slung across their chests. Angela couldn't use her firearm. Even a suppressed gunshot in a silent, echoing hospital wing would sound like a jackhammer, instantly bringing Vance's entire perimeter crashing down on her. She had to do this with her hands, and she had exactly 3 seconds to cross the gap. She reached into her tactical belt and unclipped a heavy, steel D-cell flashlight she had stripped from the Joliet airstrip. She didn't throw it at them. Instead, with a flick of her wrist, she slid it hard across the polished floor toward the opposite end of the hallway. Near the stairwell doors. Clack, clack, thud. Both guards reacted instantly. The man on the left raised his weapon, taking 2 steps toward the sound, breaking his line of sight from the elevator bank. That was all the opening Angela needed. She exploded from behind the linen cart. Her boots made 0 sound as she closed the distance with terrifying Predatory speed. Before the guard on the right could even register the blur of movement in his peripheral vision, Angela was on him. Her left hand clamped brutally over his mouth and nose, snapping his head back. Simultaneously, her right hand drove the curved blade of her karambit deep into the soft tissue right beneath his collarbone, severing the subclavian artery. He didn't even have the breath to scream. His eyes went wide with shock as his central nervous system instantly shut down. Angela caught his dead weight, preventing his heavy boots from thudding against the floor. The guard on the left spun around, his weapon coming up to bear. What the? He never finished the sentence. Using the falling mercenary as a counterweight, Angela pivoted violently, hurling her karambit like a throwing knife. The carbon steel blade spun through the air, burying itself to the hilt in the second guard's throat. He dropped his MP7, his hands flying to his neck as he collapsed backward. Angela closed the gap before he hit the ground, catching his weapon by the sling and easing his body silently onto the linoleum. 10 seconds. 2 bodies. Absolute silence. She retrieved her knife, wiping the blade clean on the man's windbreaker, and motioned toward the cracked elevator doors. Julian Hayes emerged from the shadows, his face pale and slick with sweat. He was clutching the thermal briefcase containing the Aegis heart so tightly his knuckles were bone white. He stepped over the bodies, his eyes wide with a mixture of horror and awe at the woman leading him. "Stay behind me," Angela whispered, her hand resting on the brushed steel handle of room 314. She took a slow, deep breath, burying the terrified mother deep down and letting the Tier 1 operator take the wheel. She pushed the door open. The room was dimly lit by the rhythmic, jagged green glow of Connor's heart monitor. Beep, beep, beep. Her little boy was still there, still fighting, though his breathing was shallow and forced through the ventilator. But her eyes didn't stay on her son. They locked onto the figure sitting casually in the cheap plastic visitor's chair beside the bed. Marcus Vance. He had shed his overcoat, revealing a perfectly tailored suit. In his right hand, resting comfortably on his knee, was a suppressed FN-57 pistol. The barrel was pointed directly at Connor's chest. "I have to admit, Angie," Vance said, his voice a smooth, venomous whisper that barely carried over the hum of the medical equipment. "When you didn't show up on my radar at SeaTac, I thought you had drowned in Lake Washington. But here you are, always the overachiever." Angela stepped fully into the room, leveling her 9mm directly at Vance's head. Hayes slipped in behind her, the door clicking shut. "Gun down, Vance," Angela said, her voice dropping to a sub-zero register. "You lost. We have the prototype. Now get away from my son." Vance didn't flinch. He didn't raise his weapon to meet hers. He just offered that same cold, aristocratic smile. "Did I lose?" Vance mused, casually glancing at the heart monitor. "Julian, it's good to see you alive. I assume you have the Aegis prototype in that ridiculous cooler you're hugging?" Hayes didn't speak. He just took a step back, hiding behind Angela's line of fire. "Here is the reality of our situation," Vance continued, shifting his gaze back to Angela. "You shoot me, my finger twitches, and a high-velocity 5.7mm round vaporizes Connor's failing heart before my brain even registers that I'm dead. It's simple physics. Angie, you can't beat the trigger pull." Angela's hands gripped her pistol tighter. He was right. At this distance, the reflexive muscle spasm of a dying man would be enough to pull the trigger. It was a Mexican standoff. And Vance held the ultimate hostage. "What do you want?" Angela gritted her teeth, her eyes burning holes into the director's skull. "I want the briefcase," Vance said simply. "Slide it across the floor. You give me the tech. I stand up, and I walk out that door. You get to spend the last few days of your son's life holding his hand instead of burying him tonight. That is my final offer." "Don't do it, Angela," Hayes whispered frantically from behind her. "If he takes it, Connor dies anyway, and Vance gets his army." Angela looked at Vance. She looked at the gun pointed at her boy. And then, she looked at the heavy medical equipment stacked on the rack right next to Vance's chair, the primary oxygen supply line. She didn't lower her gun. But a dark, dangerous plan began to form in the mind of the ghost of room 314. "You always were too confident, Marcus," Angela whispered. The air in room 314 was heavy, suffocating. The only sound was the sickeningly slow rhythm of Connor's heart monitor. Beep, beep, beep. Every second felt like an hour. Every heartbeat felt like it could be the last. Angela Wright, the ghost of Kandahar, stood frozen, her eyes locked onto Marcus Vance's smug, aristocratic smile. Her 9mm was leveled at his forehead. But his suppressed 5.7 was aimed directly at the frail chest of her dying son. "You always were too confident, Marcus," Angela whispered. Her voice didn't shake, but inside, a tidal wave of terror was fighting against a dam of ice-cold tactical rage. "Confidence is born of superior positioning, Angie," Vance countered, his finger resting heavily on the trigger. He glanced toward the ceiling, hearing the distant thuds of his mercenary team breaching the lower floors. "Your clock has run out. Slide the briefcase over, now." Angela looked at Vance, assessing the geometry of the room. He was sitting in the visitor's chair. Right next to his left shoulder was the vertical green column of the primary hospital oxygen supply line. Fixed to the wall, she caught Julian Hayes's eye in the reflection of the glass observation window. He was paralyzed with fear. But she needed him. "All right, Vance," Angela said, slowly lowering her non-firing left hand. "Palm open. You win. The boy isn't worth dying for." Vance's smile widened, his arrogant satisfaction sealing his fate. "Smart girl, Julian," Angela barked, never taking her eyes off Vance. "Give him the case." Hayes hesitated, his breath catching. He looked at Angela, saw the microscopic shift in her gaze toward the oxygen line, and understood. He closed his eyes, took a ragged breath, and nodded. Okay, take it," Hayes sputtered. He intentionally fumbled with the handle of the thermal briefcase, making it slip from his sweating grip. The heavy metal case hit the floor with a loud, ringing clang directly in front of Vance. Vance's eyes instinctively darted down to the prize for a microsecond. That was all the opening Angela needed. She didn't shoot Vance. Instead, she shifted her aim 5 degrees to the right and squeezed the trigger twice. Peefed. The suppressed 9mm rounds didn't hit flesh. They struck the green brass valve of the primary oxygen flowmeter just inches from Vance's head. The heavy gauge metal shattered under the impact. The pure, highly pressurized oxygen exploded outward with a deafening whoosh, creating a pressurized shockwave and instantly filling the immediate area around Vance with an invisible, super-oxygenated atmosphere. Vance recoiled in instinctive terror, his hands flying up to shield his face from the invisible blast. The sudden, Violent decompression pulled his aim away from Connor's chest. At that exact moment, a hot, static spark from a loose electrical connection in Hayes's abandoned medical monitor found the pure oxygen. Boom! A brilliant, searing blue-orange flash fire erupted around Vance, engulfing him in an instantaneous fireball. The extreme heat flash fried the fabric of his tailored suit and ignited the hair on his head. Vance screamed, a ragged, agonizing sound, as he staggered backward, dropped his weapon, and flailed wildly to extinguish the flames. Angela didn't wait. Sub-second reaction. Muscle memory. She executed a predatory charge, closing the 10-foot gap in 2 strides. She didn't use her knife. She grabbed the 2 heavy handles of the manual defibrillator unit mounted on the crash cart right next to Vance. She ripped them off the machine, the coiled black cords stretching tight. She stepped into the smoke and heat, her eyes burning. She jammed both metal paddles against Vance's chest, pinning him against the wall. "Clear," Angela roared. With her thumb, she depressed the charge button on both paddles. The defibrillator, set to its maximum joule output, delivered a massive, agonizing surge of electrical current directly through Vance's scorched chest cavity. His entire body convulsed with a violent, sickening shudder. His heart stopped instantly, overwhelmed by the lethal electrical charge. The light vanished from his eyes, replaced by a vacant stare of shocking agony. Marcus Vance sloped to the floor, dead before he hit the ground. A final hiss of pure oxygen escaped the ruptured pipe, scattering the fine gray ash that was now all that remained of his tailored suit. Alarms were blaring throughout the ICU. Smoke detectors were screeching. The corridor outside room 314 was instantly flooded with panicked nurses, doctors, and security staff. Through the chaos, the service elevator doors pried open. Dr. Evans, flanked by 2 armed hospital security guards, burst onto the floor, his face pale with horror. He saw the bodies of Vance's mercenaries in the hallway, saw the smoke billow from Connor's room. He rushed inside, sliding on the wet linoleum. "Angela, what happened? We heard gunfire." Angela dropped the defibrillator paddles. The adrenaline was draining, leaving her body trembling. Her suit was scorched, her skin burned, her bicep bleeding freely. She ignored the pain. She ignored the dead man on the floor. She grabbed Dr. Evans by the front of his white lab coat, her eyes fierce with a terrifying desperation. "He's here, doctor," Angela breathed, pointing toward the corner. Julian Hayes emerged from the haze, coughing, holding the thermal briefcase. He looked aged by 100 years, but his hands were steady. He popped the latches. The biomechanical heart was nestled inside, its microbeats glowing with a soft, persistent blue light. "Thump thump, thump thump." "Aegis," Hayes said, his voice trembling. "It's initialized. His DNA. It adapts to pediatric autoimmune rejection. It's the only chance he has." Dr. Evans stared at the synthetic marvel, then at Hayes, and finally at Angela. Seeing the absolute, unwavering hope burning in her eyes, the doctor's face hardened. He was done asking questions. "Get this man to surgery 1. Evans roared at his nurses, pointing at Hayes. "Prep for an immediate pediatric heart transplant. Level 10 emergency protocol. Go." The nurses scrambled into action. Hayes was ushered out, clutching the briefcase like a sacred relic. Dr. Evans turned to Connor's bedside, looking at the failing numbers on the monitor. "We're moving him now. Angela, Evans said softly, his hand resting on her scorched shoulder. We have to run. Every second counts. He unhooked the monitors. Within 10 seconds, the bed was being wheeled out of the room, surrounded by a dozen medical professionals in a desperate race against time. Angela was left alone in the smoked-out ruin of room 314. The empty heart monitor still flatlined, emits a continuous, shrill tone until she yanked the power cord from the wall. The silence that followed was heavy, but it was a silence filled with hope. She limped out of the room, past the charred body of the man who had tried to take everything from her. She followed the trail of medical staff toward the operating theater. She couldn't go inside, but she stood in the viewing gallery above Surgery 1. Through the massive glass window, she watched the surgical team work. She watched Hayes, dressed in scrubs, guiding Dr. Evans through the complex process of connecting the nanofibers of the Aegis heart to her son's tiny circulatory system. It felt like an eternity. The operating room was a blur of silver instruments, blue surgical gowns, and whispered commands. Angela pressed her hand against the cold glass, her heart beating in lockstep with the visual feed of her son's chest. "Fight, buddy," she whispered, her tear-stained reflection staring back at her. "Fight for Mama." And then, it happened. Dr. Evans pulled back his hands. The team froze, staring at the synthetic heart nestled in Connor's chest. Thump. A single, weak beat, a flicker of hope on the primary monitor. Thump thump. A second beat. The line was no longer flat. It was rising, a rugged, jagged green spike that began to sync with the synthetic glow of the Aegis heart. The tension in the operating room shattered. Dr. Evans closed his eyes. Exhaling a ragged breath, Hayes looked up at the viewing gallery, locking eyes with Angela, and gave a slow, tired nod. Angela's legs finally buckled. She slid down against the glass, tears flowing freely, her chest heaving with a sob of sheer, absolute relief. The ghost of room 314 had won the war. Her son had won the life. As the sun began to rise over the wet streets of Seattle, casting its light over the Emerald City, a new heartbeat began to echo in Surgery 1. The sound of a future that had almost been stolen. The sound of a promise kept in blood and fire. 6 months later, the scent of fresh-cut grass and warm cedar was a stark, beautiful contrast to the sterile stench of hospital bleach and the sharp tang of cordite. Angela Wright sat on a weathered wooden bench in Gasworks Park, the bright Seattle sun warming her face. A gentle breeze rolled off Lake Union, carrying with it the sound she had fought a war to hear, the pure, unfiltered laughter of her son. "Look, Mom, watch how high it goes." 50 yards away, 7-year-old Connor was sprinting across the green expanse of the park. His skin was no longer the ashen gray of a dying boy. It was flushed with the healthy, vibrant pink of life. He was holding the string of a bright red kite, running faster and harder than he ever had before. He didn't stumble. He didn't gasp for air. The biomechanical Aegis prototype beating flawlessly in his chest didn't just adapt, it thrived. He was a normal kid again. Actually, Angela thought with a small smile. Considering the billion-dollar tech keeping his blood pumping, he was probably the most resilient kid on the West Coast. Angela leaned back, taking a sip from her paper coffee cup. With her free hand, she scrolled through the newsfeed on her phone. The top headline on a major national network caught her eye. Shadow military contractor dismantled. Anonymous whistleblower leaks gigabytes of classified black book deals. The article detailed the catastrophic collapse of Marcus Vance's private military corporation. Federal authorities, tipped off by a massive, highly encrypted data dump originating from a secure server in Geneva, had raided the organization's remaining safe houses. The tech mogul behind the leak remained unidentified, but the article noted that all assets related to the controversial Project Aegis had been permanently destroyed before the feds arrived. Angela locked her phone and slipped it into her jacket pocket. Julian Hayes had kept his word. He had burned Vance's empire to the ground and erased the research, ensuring no one would ever come looking for the prototype inside Connor's chest. The ghost of Julian Hayes was out there somewhere, finally free. And so was she. The heavy, matte black H&K pistol was gone. The tactical vests, the encrypted phones, the karambit, all of it rested at the bottom of the Puget Sound. The Tier 1 operative who had cleared compounds in Bogotá and fought a private army in Chicago no longer existed. Connor let go of the kite string by accident, the red diamond soaring up into the clear blue sky. He didn't cry. He just turned around and ran back toward the bench, throwing his arms around Angela's neck in a tight, breathless hug. "Did you see me, Mama?" he beamed, his heart thumping a steady, powerful rhythm against her chest. Thump thump, thump thump. Angela closed her eyes, wrapping her arms around him, breathing in the scent of sunshine and little boy sweat. There were no more threats hiding in the shadows. There were no more clocks ticking down. "I saw you, buddy," Angela whispered, kissing the top of his head. "I see you." The war was over. The target had been saved. And for the first time in her life, Angela Wright was exactly where she was meant to be.